Hey everybody, I'm Tom Vassell.
I'm Zee Garcia. Hello everybody. Welcome back to our continuing series of Tiptoeing Through the Decade. Tiptoeing Through the Decade?
Tiptoe through the decade.
Traipsing through the decade.
We're halfway through as of this one.
That's right.
5 years ago. But before we get into this, we want to do some shout-outs to some of our Kickstarter backers.
Oh!
Thank you to Derek Whitmore.
Thank you, Derek.
Chris Grenard.
Thank you, Chris.
Jason Lindquist.
Thank you, Jason.
Laura Tunn.
Thank you, Laura.
Gavin Ryan.
And thank you, Gavin.
And that's good.
That's pretty good. Oh, that was all names. I was expecting at least one of those to throw off my my ability to think a specific person. I figured one of them would be a cafe or something.
Wish one of your names had been You're Welcome. Then even thank you, You're Welcome.
We appreciate it, everybody. Thanks very much, truly. All right, we're going to be talking about 2014 today. We're going to be starting off with the top games of the year, just going through some of the big hits. And then we will move on to some trends from the year. What did we spot that seemed to be either becoming a trend or was definitely already in full swing? We will, after that, talk about some of our picks from the year, some great games we liked. And let me tell you, there are some great games this year, at least for me. This is a beautiful year for me. And then we're going to end strong with your picks, viewers' picks, that we'll talk about from the chat, folks. What do we got?
All right, well, 10 games from the year hit the top 100 on Board Game Geek, which, again, is going to happen more and more as we get closer to modern days.
Of course.
Highest ranked here is Orleans.
Orleans.
That also.
Orleans.
This one kind of, this came out at Essen of that year, and it was getting a little bit of buzz, but this one has grown as time has gone by.
Sure.
Because it introduced a bag building mechanism, or at least I think that already existed to some degree. This game made it popular.
Okay.
Star Wars Imperial Assault was the peanut butter and chocolate thing. They're like, do you like the scent? Do you like Star Wars? And then Fantasy Flight said, I know we can only do miniature games for Star Wars because they didn't have the board game license. So they somehow made this game anyway, basically by adding a miniature game in this.
Yeah. They figured it out.
It was pretty big news when it came out.
Yeah,
I was extremely excited because at that point in time, I was a much bigger Star Wars fan than I am right now. And
no spoilers. Hashtag no spoilers.
No. I'm just
no spoilers, Tom.
Now they do movies. I'm just saying I was a bigger Star Wars fan 5 years ago.
Oh, come on, man. Why are you talking about this? If you bring up Babu Freak in this chat, I'm gonna flip my top.
Oh man, I wish that worked. Okay, keep going.
Fields of Arle is from Uwe Rosenberg, and this is one I think I played with you, in fact.
It's very esoteric because you'll notice here the ratings drop, 6,000, because this wasn't only, at the time it came out, it was an only two-player game.
That's right, and it had the thing he usually did, a bunch of resources, trading this for that. This is the one that put Pete on my radar. I love Pete now. I'm a big fan. One of my favorite resources of all time is Pete.
Pete and repeat jumped in a pond.
Next up, Five Tribes, which was also came out at not at Essen but at Gen Con that year. I remember quickly rushing over there early in the morning to go get a demo of this one, and it was interesting to me because, well, it was from Bruno Catala, my favorite designer, but also this was a heavier game coming from Days of Wonder.
It was the heaviest one they had done to this point, probably.
Yeah.
It was a distinct change from their...
I mean, they were doing just like pretty family games, and this one kept the pretty, but there was a lot going on in it. It was a thinky game. It was a very different move from the company, and I was happy for it. I thought it was a great game.
It's almost an anomaly though, because I don't think they've ever really gone back to this point. They did a couple games later, like Yamata.
They went back to it, like they sort of tested the waters with a couple of them, and then went back to family weight stuff.
Sure.
Yes, that's true. Patchwork is after that, another Uwe Rosenberg game.
This one I don't remember getting a ton of buzz when it came out. This is another one that grew and grew and grew.
Right.
It was a 2-player, again, only game. It was his first of many Tetris-style games. But you look how many ratings it has, 37,000.
ton.
It just took off.
Yeah. And the next one you really like.
Sure, Roll for the Galaxy was a sequel to Race for the Galaxy. That's dice, and I didn't know, I wasn't know what to expect from that, right? Race for the Galaxy had been kind of fizzling for me at that point in time.
Well, there were a bunch of expansions, and they weren't really bringing it.
And they were not. So I was like, Roll for the Galaxy. Then the look of it was great. If I remember correctly, we played Roll for the Galaxy like the final week or two of 2014.
Oh, really?
I mean, it was at the very end because Jason declared it as Game of the Year, if you remember.
Okay,
and I was like,
vaguely remember that.
How can this be your favorite game when you only played it a couple times?
I vaguely remember that, yeah. And then Dead of Winter was also a big hit from that year. And it's one that I don't personally like, but I can see you really like it.
Yeah, this is where Plaid Hat was. They moved into like the king of the world. They had gone from a small, they're still a small company, but they didn't seem small at this point. Dead of Winter had definitely people talking about them. The Crossroads Systems people were looking for the next Crossroads game, something they never really followed that through on.
Not quite, yeah. Not what the promise was.
I also don't think they were expecting this one to be as popular as it was. I think part of that was The Walking Dead was very popular, and this game was everything. Was The Walking Dead in a box.
Right, yeah. It was a very stylized game, they did a good job with it. After that came Alchemist here we're looking at. Alchemist is an interesting beast because, while I haven't played it, and actually a lot of folks tell me I should play it because they think I'll like it, it was a heavy deduction game.
I don't know if you would like the game built around it. The deduction thing, but what was really interesting about Alchemist, it's the first major release that I know of. Maybe there might be one other, but it's certainly one of the first that used the app from the phone.
Yeah.
And Alchemist was the first one. I remember they came and showed it to me at the booth, and I was like, wow. You can use your phone to read the card, and it knows what the card does, and that was just a fascinating thing to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Star Realms has 30,000 reviews on here, or people rating it.
Is that the most? Let's take a real quick
No,
look
it was. I looked at it earlier. Splendor, yeah.
Oh, yeah. We'll talk about Splendor briefly. But, yeah, Star Realms.
Star Realms is this tiny little box. It's a deck-building game for 2 out of that box. You can buy multiple boxes, play with more people. But this thing was everywhere. And, I mean, it made White Wizard what it is now. White Wizard still does this kind of game. They still largely, for the most part, make small card games that feel like collectible card games. They went outside of that a little bit recently with Sorcerer, but for the most part, this was their bread and butter. And this model worked for them. They could sell you this game for $12 or something ridiculous like that and just make it up in bulk. And they sold a bunch of them.
It was easily the game of the con of Origins 2014.
Yes.
Everybody was playing it.
Right. Legendary Encounters continued the Legendary system by taking it, adding an IP, which they did several more times, and changing it a little bit.
Right, they actually kind of branched. They just then had Legendary, which was the Marvel stuff, and a few other things, and Encounters added a bit more of a game to it.
Yeah, and they did this one, and then eventually there would be a Predator one, and then eventually there would be a lot of weird ones. They did. I mean, they just came out with a 007 Legendary Encounters. They're all over the place. But this was... It's weird because I want to say this was the arm of Legendary that did the IPs, but Legendary is Marvel intellectual property.
And also there was Big Trouble in Little China, and there's a few other ones, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, that were in the other half. It's a weird, I think, confusing delineation.
Istanbul was a big hit from that year.
It won the Kenner Spiel.
Big award getter, a very solid Euro game. Castles of Mad King Ludwig, same thing, big Euro game, lots of attention there. That was the follow-up to
Suburbia. Did not do as well as Suburbia, but got, certainly, it's still ranked 104, so.
Yeah, it's a critical darling, Arcadia Quest from Come On.
Yeah, Cool Mini at this point in time was, they were at the top of the game. They were coming off the zombie sides. They had this one. I think this year we once again went to, or at least I went to the Cool Mini or Not convention, and it
Expo,
started getting bigger. And they, as a company, were getting a lot more notice.
Yeah, definitely. Then the next one, that's all you. You love that game.
Oh, Zaya? Well, this was one of the first Kickstarters that was hitting these lists. If you notice, as we've been going through these, no Kickstarters are at the top of these lists.
Right.
With the exception of Zombicide.
And Alien Frontiers.
And Alien Frontiers, right.
Yeah.
But Zaya was one of the first, people were talking about it from some guy who just designed a board game.
It was a big sandbox-style game, too.
It was.
Not a lot of those.
It's one of those games that would probably not have been published without Kickstarter.
Right, exactly. Especially not from one person with a passion project. And then we have Splendor.
This was the year of Splendor.
Splendor was a big deal. And I honestly, for the life of me, I'm not sure I can put my finger on why. Why do you
Sometimes it's being the right game in the right spot. It obviously is an easy game. The poker chips.
Sure, it's pretty.
Yeah,
but it's not.
It wasn't the box cover.
No, it's not, and it's not the card art.
It's not the theme.
I think the poker chips are nice. There's no denying that they go a long way to making this look good on the table.
I think it's the fact that you were consistently throwing and taking poker chips. You were consistently building an engine in a fairly easy way, and it just hit that spot and people went berserk. It was, in our game group, it was a game that I saw played for well over a year or two after, consistently sitting at tables after it was released, which is very rare.
Right.
Where, every made-up, somebody was playing Splendor.
I don't know. It's hard to, like I said, put my finger on why. I can wager, why I think it was, and I want to say it's because a lot of companies were moving towards heavier games that have a lot of rules. And along comes this little game with basically 2 rules that looks pretty enough, and everybody at game night could play it. Anybody could be taught and be proficient in it very quickly. And it caught fire. It just spread. It was much easier to play this than Castles of Mad King Ludwig, right?
Well, it's an easy game.
That's what it is. I think that's what it has to be.
Even now in the comments, there's people like, I don't like Splendor, I don't like Splendor. Sure, maybe you don't. But 50,000 people are, at least.
Right.
It is a game that gamers kind of were like, wow, and then people keep playing it.
Right.
It's just, every once in a while, there's a game that clearly is the most popular game of the year, and this year it was Splendor.
It was.
It was nominated for the Spiel des Jahres and got beat out by Camel Up, which is a good game, actually. And at the time, the whole gaming community was kind of like, how did that happen?
Right.
Because Splendor was that much more popular.
Right. I remember, in fact, playing Camel Up when I played Camel Up for the first time was at Gen Con. And I thought, upon that first play, this isn't very good. This feels kind of loosey-goosey. This is not very captivating. I've since grown to like it much more, and that's largely because of the second edition, too. I think the second edition of Camel Up is much better.
Sure.
But, yeah, it was a weird pick, and it seemed like one at the time, certainly. There's a bunch of other ones that I like here that I'll be talking about in a bit, like Deception and Imperial Settlers. You probably want to talk about Onitama. I remember us playing
Well,
this.
actually, Onitama came out in 2014 from a small Japanese company.
That's
we
right.
played that later. More specifically, the one just a couple below it, Sheriff of Nottingham, was the first game in the Dice Tower Essentials line. I'll talk about that in a bit.
Yes.
Other than that, though, we saw the second...
We had a follow-up to Pandemic, a dice game to Pandemic. Colt Express was a big award getter that year as well. Abyss was a game that came out at Gen Con that year, along with 5 Tribes, 2 different companies, but both from Bruno Catala. And I thought it was an amazing 1-2 punch.
It was. Now, we were talking earlier about trends for this year. Abyss started something I said, I hope this doesn't become a trend, and it didn't, where they had 5 different box covers.
Nothing written on the box.
Just a big face.
Just a big cover, yeah, and alternate covers, too.
And that didn't take off at all.
No,
I think the only game to do it since was the Abyss card game.
The Abyss card game, which is coming out soon or around now, yeah. All right. Do you want to keep looking at these?
Yeah, well, Evolution, I'll talk about that briefly. We mentioned Camel Up that came out, Battle of Five Armies. There's actually quite a few games that came out this year.
There are tons of good games that came out this year.
Was a pretty big deal. Red 7 was like a sleeper hit of a small card game.
That's true.
And yeah, I think that's pretty much all I want to talk about here. Let's move on because we got some big stuff here.
All right. Do you want to take it for trends? Would you like to start? You kind of hinted at a couple of things you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, but the thing I'm going to talk about isn't mentioned in here at all.
Okay.
Very rarely does news shake the industry. We do news all the time. News.
Sure.
But the news this year blew all of our minds. And that was 5 years ago, actually. Asmodee bought Fantasy Flight. This changed a lot of stuff in the industry. It made Fantasy Flight was turning into this big company on their own. They had started from one guy, Christian Peterson, who he did comic books and he started doing games, and every year was getting bigger and bigger. Asmodee, I had mentioned, was starting to grow bigger. And when Asmodee bought Fantasy Flight, I thought, you sure it's not the other way around?
Right.
It was weird. And then Asmodee was just like, hello. I don't know how to explain it.
I know. It was a weird thing because it did come out of nowhere in some ways.
Also, 5 years ago, the whole internet said that the sky was falling. We're still here, guys.
Right. And that didn't really slow down for a while for Asmodee. They kept buying up companies. For a while there, it seemed like every other week there was an announcement about Asmodee buying somebody else up.
Sure, but since and before,
but this was the
none
big
of them
one.
was shook the industry like this.
No,
that I thought.
No. I mean, because Fantasy Flight, if you've been noticing as we've been talking through these years, they're front and center out of every year from 2010 at least, right? And suddenly, boop, they get bought up by another company. And they didn't even seem like they were able to, right? Like you're saying, I'm like, wait, Asmodee came along and bought them? They didn't seem like a big player.
Asmodee seemed like a combo player. When we went to Gen Con in 2014, they showed us a bunch of games. We went to a special meetup,
yeah.
and they showed Deus, and they showed us the Cult Express.
Sure.
They were like, oh, it's like, okay, Asmodee's kind of cool. They're like this conglomerate of these European publishers.
Right.
I don't even know what Asmodee is. I just know that's this conglomerate. Also Fantasy Flight. And I was like, well, wait a minute now. These people are big.
Yeah.
And this was the beginning of them becoming a pretty big beast. They did some pretty big jumps. We'll talk about those in the next couple of years, but this was easily the biggest start.
I agree with that. All right, I'm going to talk about a couple of gaming trends that I noticed as I was looking through the games this year. One of them was driven, I think, the very first salvo in it was patchwork, as we talked about. And this is something that became added to our gamer vocabulary that was not a word I ever used before. We had like tableau became one of those words, right?
Yeah, tableau.
Tableau. I never said that word out loud before I got into gaming. Well, the one for this year was polyomino. Polyominoes became a thing.
I still say Tetris.
Tetris pieces, but polyominoes is one of those things that patchwork was the beginning of the deluge of these kinds of games. That's not to say it was the first one that ever used Tetris pieces, of course not. But it set a precedent for, polyominoes, Tetris-type shapes, putting them into different patterns and then doing something with that. We had Blockus, did it a little bit, but Blockus wasn't affecting this market.
Okay.
Blockus was like a big box store kind of,
Sure.
kind of game, and it didn't seem like there was a lot of feedback loop to these kinds of games. When Uwe Rosenberg did it, suddenly it was cool, and it was off to the races with these kinds of games. He himself did a bunch, but then all sorts of designers followed suit, and this has become a kind of game that you'll likely see very frequently these days. So the whole polyomino thing, I thought was an interesting push in the industry. Not as revolutionary, perhaps, as something like deck building, but it's there.
I was going to mention it, but I
everywhere.
bet Z talks about this.
Yeah? There you go. What else you got?
Okay, so we talked a few years ago about sequels to games.
Yeah.
Companies realized, hey, sequels are here. This was a year I noticed the sequels were just not always the bombastic hits, and very rarely were, actually. So King of New York. Super buzz about King of New York. The sequel to King of Tokyo.
Yes.
It came out, boop, gone, almost.
Yes.
St. Petersburg was reprinted. Who cares? Cash and Guns, the sequel came out. That did a little bit better.
They're fine.
But still did not have the buzz that Cash and Guns when it first came out did.
Right.
Antique 2, no one cared.
No.
Escape, we talked about that last year. They did Zombie City.
No.
Nothing. Crickets. North Wind, based on Starfarers of Catan, the card game. No one talked about this game.
I played it a few times, and yeah, it just didn't go anywhere.
Right, so sequels weren't necessarily a caching. They work sometimes, Zombicide 2 or whatever, but people were not always jumping on the bandwagon for these.
But it was the norm.
Oh, for sure it was
That's
the norm.
why
I'm just saying it's not working as always.
It's not always working. It's
Actually,
not
it's
a
often
silver,
not. If you look
it's
at
not
these
a
top
silver
games.
bullet. Yeah. But I think that's interesting because even after all of these games that did not necessarily mean sequel equals cash, people still do it. It's that,
sure.
Because undeniably that buzz was there, whether the game had the legs or not. Like the first push of King of New York, I'm sure did well.
Oh no! If you remember at that
know what I
Gen Con,
mean?
people were complaining because it sold out every single day.
Eventually, folks maybe didn't love it so much, but you're gonna get your box office weekend, so to speak, if your game is based on something people already love. So yeah, absolutely. But yes, you're right. It's not a silver bullet. All right, my next one here is I noticed with a few games this year or expansions that this was the beginning for me of these games that want to have their cake and eat it too. And by that I mean, is this game cooperative? Is this game competitive? You can have it all. This was the beginning of that. I was starting to feel it.
I hate that trend.
Me too. But you like some games in that trend. And one of those games, well, this was not available yet, is Orleans. Orleans is a competitive game. It eventually got a cooperative mode.
I would argue, though, that was an expansion.
I don't care. It still followed a trend. But this year we had Legendary Encounters, has co-op, or you can compete with some people being the aliens. You had the DC deck building game had come out previously, and that was a competitive game. Well, this year they came out with the Crisis mode, which is co-op. And you just would start to see this idea of we can have both. You can everybody work together or break off into groups and compete. I actually do think it's a bad trend. I don't normally like games that attempt to do it all because it rarely works. You really want to stick to something that your system does well and do that. This was probably, if not now, then later in time, informed by Kickstarter, right? That idea of we want more, give us more, make it co-op and solo and competitive and a dexterity game. We want all of it in a single box. But it began around this time. For better or worse, I guess.
Well, on that note, then, I already mentioned Zaya. This was the year where, like, you could make a small game and become a publisher. Yeah. Now, some of the companies that did it, we were already seeing cracks in the armor of, hey, not everyone's going to follow through on this. Some companies were falling apart. But you could now create your own buzz, and that's why I was not worried about the Asmodee Fantasy Flight thing. Everyone said, oh, they're going to buy everyone up in the industry. Nope. Little small people were able to create their own huge, massive awareness. Awakened Realms didn't even exist at this point in time. And some of these other companies that have made these huge Kickstarters, Seventh Continent, Gloomhaven, these guys didn't exist at this point in time as companies. And yet they were coming around the corner.
Yeah.
And Zaya was that harbinger of that. Like, you can create, because Zaya is interesting, because games that were like it, say Duel of Ages, things like that, that had come out years prior to that, they came out, the guy pushed it, they went to conventions, and it got a cult following.
Sure.
But wasn't able to get everybody.
Right.
Kickstarter allowed you to do that.
And it dovetailed nicely into that, shucks, I'm just one guy.
Sure.
This is a dream I've had for 15 years. Here is the product. And and you can make a good game, right, by yourself. That's fine. And lots of people do. But it gave you a soapbox from which to say, this is mine, this is honest and real and personal, help me make it true.
Yeah.
And bam. And you're right. I think Zee was that first shot. That's a good one. I like that one. That's all I got. This was a year that followed a lot of trends for me. Many of them continued from the previous years. But, and honestly, there was one more could have talked about here, a big one. I'm saving that bullet. It's not quite swinging for the fences yet. I'm really mixing my metaphors today, man.
The bullet. I swing at those all the time.
Yes.
All right. For the Dice Tower, and these years, we had the Dice Tower Essentials started. Mm-hmm. So I thought that might be an interesting idea. I pitched it to Arcane Wonders. They took it. And I thought, I didn't think anyone would be interested in it. So Sheriff of Nottingham was the first that came out this year, and Onitama the second was a great 1-2 starting punch.
Yes, yes.
On our own end, Zee was still not yet part of the Dice Tower, but he was unofficially part of the Dice Tower. He was going all kinds of stuff. And I think our best live show ever happened in 2014. It was the first singing show. The show that I threatened to do. Yeah.
At Gen Con, yes.
I had threatened to do that show, and we sat there, and we're like, let's sing. It was not a huge room. We do big rooms now, but it was like a medium-sized room, and everything worked that year. I'm not saying the other shows have been bad, but that year, something happened.
It was a different thing. It was weird and different and unique and unexpected at that point.
We were starting to get it slightly bigger as a show, and please don't take this as bragging at all. I don't mean it to be, but it was neat. But we were losing some of the smallness. Like at Origins, I no longer did a meal with our fans. I think this was the last year we did one.
Yeah.
Because like 120 people showed up, and I was like, I guess we can't do this anymore.
Sure, right.
So, all right. Well, those are trends that we noticed.
All right, let's talk about some of our picks here, Tom. I'm going to take lead on this because, boy, I have a lot of picks. My favorite game from this year, I think, is 5 Tribes.
Well, you think?
Yeah, I think, because I have 2 other games on this list that I rate 10s.
That you rank 10?
Yes. 5 Tribes for me is a 10 out of 10, and there are 2 more games on this list of 5 I wrote down that I rate 10 out of 10s. I don't have that many, so don't feel like, you just rate a bunch of 10s. I don't. I have a very few and select group that I rate 10s. There are 3 from this year.
Well, this tells all 3. Don't hold me in suspense.
I can't possibly do that.
Let me look. I got to guess these. Okay, so I know 5 Tribes is 1.
Yes, it is indeed.
I don't think you like Istanbul that much.
I like Istanbul quite a bit. I think I rated an 8 or a 9.
Onitama I know you love, but not 10.
Not that much, no.
San Juan.
San Juan is not new to this year. That's the 2nd edition.
Deus?
Yes, Deus is 1. I rate that a 10 out of 10. You already passed the other one.
I was going to say Abyss for my second one.
No.
Imperial Settlers.
Imperial Settlers, yes.
Yes.
But Abyss is a 9 out of 10, I think, for me also. So
this was a good year for you, for sure.
It was a really good year for me, man. Lots of great games, good-looking games. All those games are good-looking games. They all have exactly what I like. A lot of activity, but they're not bloated. They give you little unique powers, but they're manageable. They play within a fairly tight time frame, but they're thinky. I get that's exactly where my tastes live, in the sort of the middle, the best of both worlds. And I get that from all these games. Imperial Settlers was an evolution of 51st State, which I really enjoyed. And this was just more palatable than 51st State ever was. I could teach this to a lot more people. The iconography problem was largely solved. The game was cuter. It was more appealing. And then I already said 5 Tribes was great, but the other one was Deus, which I discovered at Essen. It must have been Essen that year. I was at Essen that year.
You saw it. You saw it at that meetup we did at Gen Con. I don't think you played it there. I played it. I don't know if you did.
I saw it, and maybe I saw it there and didn't play it. I know for a fact
it didn't look very good.
I know I got it at Essen. And it must have been my first or second time at Essen. I hadn't been there much yet, and I just remember it looking really good. I never had a problem with the way the game looks, though I know some people do. And once I played it, I found it really interesting and appealing. And the more I played it, the more I just fell in love with it. It is such a captivating system that is so streamlined for the plethora of options you really have. So, yeah, Deus is fantastic. Like you said, a really good year for me.
While I'm talking about mine, you can start typing yours in the comments, and we'll talk about yours in just a second.
Yes.
For me, the defining game of this year is really Sheriff.
Of course.
Now, I mean, here's the thing, and people say, well, of course, it's the Dice Tower Essential.
Well,
but
of course, it's the Dice Tower Essentials.
Right. But I picked it before the Dice Tower Essential, you know. We had played this game years before, and it was really streamlined, and they did fantastic art, and I was so happy to see how well this one was received. And that was good. I mean, Only Time was the same way. I distinctly remember the first game of that was with Z. We were at my house. I said, here's some little Japanese game, which made him interested. Abstract, we both played it. We were like, this is amazing, this game.
Yes. Played again. I beat you again, and then we played again, and I beat you again.
No one's keeping track of that stuff.
Nobody
Spyfall and Viceroy both came
Spyfall.
out this year, and this was the year I think that I noticed Hobby World existed, and in fact Russian publishers in general.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of an interesting thing to me. Like I said, the whole sequel thing was wearing on me a bit. Star Wars Imperial Assault I loved a lot. Not quite. It wasn't as exciting for me, I guess, as Descent. I don't know why.
The idea of we just reskin stuff now. I think this is the first game that in my head I was like, so wait, FFG reskinned their own game?
I still like the game.
Okay, now this has happened a lot, right? But
yeah,
they do this all the time. Not just them. Companies do this all the time. I mean, we have Marvel Splendor coming out, folks. That's happening.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, this is what I'm talking about. Imperial Assault felt like the first one that was like...
Don't get me wrong, I still really like it, and I still like these games, but I wanted to see newer stuff.
Sure.
So that's where I was at. Let's see what y'all said here. Jumping to...
Somebody's just saying right there, Deus is not pretty to me. Kabuki Kid, how dare you?
It's not pretty to anyone.
That's mean, and I disagree wholeheartedly. Somebody saying Onirim, yes, second edition came out this year.
Also, Trevor said the Fire didn't like the first big coin game. We're not necessarily in that group of people who want to play coin games, the big giant games from GMT, but I do know they're very popular, for sure. Onirim was the year before.
Well, like I said, second edition came out this year.
Star Realms was really fascinating to me. I think it kind of brought into this whole that deck builders don't have to be big. They were starting to get bloated. Like, oh, you think this deck builder? Look at this one. Look at this one.
Yeah.
And White Wizard was like, but look at this one. And people just went bananas.
Deception Murder in Hong Kong, I have on my list right here, is the one I didn't talk about that I wrote down. But yeah, that's the year that came out. Really neat stuff.
Murder in Hong Kong, Deception. Gray Fox started coming into their own this year. Gray Fox initially started off as a subsidiary of Cool Stuff, and then they broke off. They're two separate companies now, and Gray Fox has really blossomed over the past years. Deception Murder in Hong Kong was a good one, although I don't know if it was done by Gray Fox in 14 or if that wasn't until 15.
That might have been 15.
Let's see. Whoa. Frosky says, 2014 is probably the most important year for me in gaming. It's the year I really got into hobby, and my favorite game of the year of all time came from this year, Istanbul. Yeah, and
very good game, yes.
Istanbul's interesting because when I first heard about it, I was like, that didn't look that interesting.
Oh, at this point,
I think the award helped the game.
You think so?
Oh, I played it because
I remember
of the award.
at this point, no. You see, the way I remember this conversation going in my head was, I must have already been pretty well versed in games because I remember thinking, oh, Rudiger Dorn, oh, he's reusing his tower deployment mechanism from Knights, which was not a good game. I had all this already happen in my head, and so I went into it already knowing the designer and the mechanism a little bit, and I really liked it. But I guess that, between that span of, let's call it 6 years or so, I really immersed myself into learning all this stuff that just rattles around in my head. So yeah, Istanbul's a great pick. Istanbul is a really, really good game, and the expansions were really good as well.
Big Bang says this is the year that Tiny Epic Games started. I'm not sure if they published a game this year because I didn't see it on a list, but maybe that's when they started kickstarting games.
Ah.
Is that when a company starts? Does a company start when they start kickstarting, or when they publish your first game? I don't care.
When does the decade start, Tom?
What came first, the Kickstarter or the egg?
The egg.
Let's see here.
true.
A
What
lot
came
of people
first?
are mentioning Arkwright. Paperback is interesting. Is that
Paperback,
That
yeah.
was much farther down the list, I guess.
No, it's on there. It's
Oh,
on
there
there.
it is.
Yeah.
Paperback was kind of like that. Hey, some guy. Again, that falls in the Zaya thing.
Yes.
You ever hear of Tim Fowers? No, he made a game called Paperback. Doesn't sound that interesting. It's deck building.
Word game deck building. Yeah.
Yeah. So
So
that
it's
was
a
neat.
good-looking game too.
We should also mention Evolution a bit, because Evolution, again, originally from a Russian publisher, and then North Star said, well, we can take this and make this even better. It's like, okay, sure. I thought it was an okay game. North Star made this a game people talked about.
Right. And North Star was a party game company too.
Yeah, but now they're
They-
the
yeah.
Evolution company, I
Yeah.
feel.
Yeah.
Yeah, lots of people talking about the zombie theme was in full swing. Lots been in full swing for what?
Yes.
Kanban, a lot of people like Kanban, and that had come out this year too. Although this was not a year of heavy Euro games, really. There was a few, but not
There were a
many.
few. I don't
It was,
know.
Oh, no. I mean, look at the top. So Orleans, maybe, and then you jump down and it's Star Wars, Fields of Arles, a Euro game, but Five Tribes, Patchwork, Roll for the Galaxy, Dead of Winter, Alchemist, Star Realms. These are not what we would consider the heavier Euro games. You go down here and you finally find La Granja and Kanban, but there's just not a ton of them.
I guess so.
That
This was
came
a
out
good
this
year
year.
for Euro games for me. So I guess
That's
ultimately,
medium ones, yeah. So
Viceroy came out that year. Yes, absolutely. Viceroy was a very good one.
and I think this was the year Scythe hit Kickstarter.
Somebody saying Evolution Climate is one of their family's favorites, and I think Evolution Climate is better than Basic Evolution. What they added to that is really cool. It was a good year, and again, they're going to
They're
be
all
getting
gonna be good years at
better.
this
They're
point.
going to be getting obviously more recent as well. So your recollection of these years as we continue this series is going to catch up to ours if it hasn't already.
That's true. We only have 4 videos left. So next week, we're doing only 3 of them because of Christmas. We're not going
Right.
to be doing this all next week. So on Monday, we'll be back with 15. Thursday and Friday, 16 and 17. And then the following Monday, we'll do 18 and 19 together since they're so recent.
Yes.
But it's easier for us to remember stuff from those years. Although I think, honestly, the older years are slightly more interesting because it's easier to see the trends the farther back. It's weird. I can see the
Absolutely.
games better, but the farther I get away, I can see what was going on that year.
That's right. Yeah. A lot of these games we still own. I have lots of these still in my collection. They don't feel, even when we started at 2010, these games just don't feel old.
Well,
That's the beautiful thing about gaming is these games, to me, just don't age as much as other forms of entertainment. An old movie looks grainy, an old video game looks pixelated. Board games, it just doesn't age the same way. So it is nice to go and take a stroll down memory lane if it's not very long ago. But
memories. Don't go watch the new cat movie. I hear it's bad.
meow.
All right. Hey, thanks for joining us here on this. Like I said, we'll be back next week live. It's been a week full of live stuff, but we're done with live stuff now. We got to take the weekend off. Until next time, I'm Tom Vassell.
I am Z Garcia. Thanks, everybody.
Have fun gaming.
Thanks so much for watching another Dice Tower video. If you enjoy our videos, subscribe to the channel for more fun, comprehensive board game coverage. Also, consider joining us at one of our events. Come to Dice Tower Retreat, a small, intimate gathering where gaming is king. Join us for Dice Tower Cruise, the largest board game cruise. Attend Dice Tower West in Las Vegas for gaming fun on the West Coast, or Dice Tower East in Orlando, in sunny Florida. Dice Tower Conventions, the friendliest gaming conventions on Earth. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower.